Hello, in just a moment we've got the press preview for you. I'll look at what's in the morning papers. First, though, a reminder of our top stories here this evening. And Donald Trump has reignited his personal attack on the federal judge who halted his travel ban, telling the country to blame him if America is attacked. The Israeli Prime Minister is to press Theresa May to take a tougher stance on Iran. The pair meet tomorrow in London. And far-right candidate Marine Le Pen has launched her campaign to become the next French president by promising a Frexit referendum within 6 months if elected. Hello, you're watching the press preview on Sky News. Joining me this evening to go through the papers is the Daily Mirror columnist known as Fleet Street Fox, Susie Boniface, and the author and businessman Michael Heyman. So a very good evening to both of you. So let's remind you what's on those front pages then. And The Guardian looks at how allies of Donald Trump are coming out fighting despite a judicial setback on his travel ban. The Metro leads with Theresa May's rent revolution and the government's plans to shake up the housing market. The Daily Mail also looks at what it calls a downsizing revolution, with pensioners set to be given incentives to free up space for the housing crisis. The Financial Times leads on claims from big business leaders that Brexit is already having a negative effect on Britain. The Daily Telegraph says that 1 in 6 accident and emergency wards are under threat of closure, calling it the worst ever crisis facing the NHS. The Times also leads with a story on the NHS, saying that hospitals will be legally obliged to charge foreign patients for treatment. And that's also the story on the Daily Express, which goes saying that NHS tourists will be made to pay. The Daily Mirror has allegations about a plot to blackmail David Beckham. And The Sun also leads with a story about David Beckham too. While the Daily Star leads with George Michael's lover being cleared of involvement with his death by police. And The Eye newspaper says Jeremy Corbyn is braced for a fresh rebellion by Labour MPs over Brexit. That's actually the Independent's front page. I can show you The Eye as well. That's the last paper. If you want to have a quick look at that. There it is. That's on the subject of Donald Trump's visit. Their lead is MPs threaten to boycott Trump at Westminster. So let's chat through some of the stories there on the front pages and inside the papers with Susie Boniface and Michael Heyman. Welcome properly to both of you. So we're going to talk first of all about the housing white paper, aren't we? You've picked out the Daily Mail's front page story. We've had a little bit about generation rent. This is a different idea, isn't it? The idea that pensioners with big family homes are going to be given incentives to move out and free up that housing space.
Yeah. The subs on some of our national newspapers really need to look up the meaning of the word revolution, because it's been used a couple of times on front pages today. None of these things are revolutions. What they're talking about here is Gavin Barwell, the housing minister, is releasing a white paper, which is a policy document, an idea, a suggestion. It's a fairly detailed suggestion, but it is just a suggestion, saying that we want to help and offer some incentives to the elderly population to move on out of their properties. Now, if you are in the southeast of England and you're sitting in a property you've been in for 30 years and maybe it's increased in value by £500,000, the government is not going to give you £500,000 to make up for you moving out of that property. Added to which, you probably want to be near your family or your friends that are in the same area that you've been in for a long time.
Presumably you get the price of the house plus incentives. Is that what they're saying?
Well, what we don't know from this story is it local authority accommodation or is it private accommodation? Because there's obviously a world of difference in terms of, I guess, people's rights as tenants or as owners and those sorts of things. But I think the point to make here is that it's not new. I mean, London has been experimenting with this for the best part of 10 years, which is basically the opportunity to move the elderly into other accommodation. Now, what London has done is moved people into other towns around the country. A lot of coastal towns have been depopulated.
And this is people in social housing,
That's
isn't
right,
it? But
yeah.
when they come to, when they get a bit older, the council offers them somewhere else to go.
The thing is, it's a matter of the head and the heart. The heart is a lot of old people don't want to move. It's a big emotional issue. The head is that you've got a lot of people quite often. They'll be on their own. They're living in houses that have become too big for them. And I think, you know, the question the question about how you address that is fraught with difficulty, I think.
It is fraught with difficulty because people who have been living in an area sometimes all their life will have a support structure around them. They'll have family, they'll have friends, and uprooting them at later stages of life.
Their house because that's when their children or grandchildren come to visit. My parents have a home with extra bedrooms, and then half the week it's got me and my daughter and my dog and stuff in it, so suddenly it's packed up to the jowls again. But also it talks in The Sun, the same story, they talk about these incentives including help with moving costs, which isn't necessarily going to be what stops most people moving. If you, you know, what people are talking about in terms of elderly who are living in properties that are far too big for them would be a little old lady who's living in a £2 million property in London that's, you know, suddenly inflated massively while she's lived in it. And it doesn't say that this is the kind of thing that, if they're talking about social housing tenants, it's not a revolution.
But it's the flip side. It's the flip side of the story about generation rent, which is younger people moving in to lots of sort of newly available rented housing. But of course, I suppose part of that stock is going to be made out of older people moving out and making space.
Yeah, but the white paper does say that older people, it defines as over 55s who can be offered sheltered accommodation. Now, 55 isn't really elderly anymore, and I think most 55-year-olds being offered sheltered housing would take it as a bit of an insult, to be frank. So I think this white policy is not going to be law in quite the way it's being presented as per a nice headline on a Monday morning for
But maybe they're sparking a debate we've got to have.
They're just sparking the wrong debate, because we have lots of empty houses in this country. We have more than enough houses to home everybody we've got in this country, and we allow them to remain empty because they're owned by incredibly wealthy Tory voters, and so they don't crack down on them.
People have more than one home.
Of course they do.
OK, let's move on to another issue, the issue of Donald Trump. The Eye picks up the angle about his forthcoming state visit to this country. They're suggesting that MPs might boycott him.
Yeah, he's coming. We can't do anything about that. There are a million jobs in this country which rely upon American firms. There are a million jobs in the US that rely on some British firms working over there. We do have to have trade, whether we like this man or whether we don't. And he is coming. He's a head of a state. He's meeting our head of state, the Queen, poor old Brenda. And we have to have him here. And the issue is how we treat him, how we greet him. And personally, I think there should be a lot of people going out on a protest, no placards necessary, just go and line the mall, turn your back on him, undo your trousers and bend over.
Well, I don't...
Slap your bottom at Mr Trump, and that will tell him exactly what we think.
I'm not sure I'd agree with that, the royal salute in that way. I mean, I think
I'll totally do it.
Look, I'd go back to Obama's quote, you know, when people go low, go high, right? You know, this is the head of state of Britain's most important trading partner. Also, its partner on a whole range of geopolitical issues. They don't call it the special relationship for nothing. I think there are a lot of people in this country that don't like the result of that election, but it is a result, and I think it would be an absolutely... It would be a poor move of people, almost a petulant move, not to afford him the right to visit this country in the same way that, frankly, we've afforded so many other heads of state.
So you want the visit to go ahead, but what about the way that people respond? What about the way MPs respond? Because this article is focusing on what they say is more than a quarter of MPs who are ready to deliver a snub.
I think they're wrong.
This is petulance. This is saying we don't like him, why should we?
I think they are wrong, actually, and I think that in this instance is that when he comes over, is that he should be treated like another head of state. It shouldn't be a popularity contest.
No, he should be given extra special treatment, and that extra special treatment should involve a visit to the Balti Belt, a visit to a Sikh temple where he has to take his shoes off and wear a head covering.
Multicultural Britain.
He should have to go to multicultural Britain. He should have to be introduced to the Queen as though she were someone of German descent. Everyone he meets should have to inform him of their immigration status and what their parents and what their grandparents and where they came from.
He should get a picture of real Britain. I think that is
real Britain.
Yeah.
OK, let's move on, because you've picked out a story in the Express. Just to give it a little bit of context, The Guardian's lead story is on this element, the fact that there's an ongoing fight that he has now with the judiciary over his travel ban, because the latest attempt by him to appeal against the judge's decision, which has blocked it, has failed. So he's come out fighting on Twitter, hasn't he, about this? But he's not managed to overturn it yet. It's still got some way to go through the courts.
Well, and he's facing a very healthy understanding right now about the limitations of his office as it pertains to the Constitution, which is that this is not in his gift to just overrule the courts. And I think that in that respect, it's a very healthy early lesson for him. I mean, whether people are coming or going, I think is the secondary part. I think how this story plays out is don't victimise judges that are doing their job, make good laws.
Well, that's right, because he yesterday referred to the judge who made this ruling, called him a so-called judge. Today he's tweeted saying, can't believe a judge would put our country in such peril. If something happens, blame him and the court system. So that's tough talking, isn't it?
Yeah, well, he's almost inviting a Trump supporter, or a slightly deranged Trump supporter, should we say, to go and personally attack this judge, which isn't going to go down terribly well. But what's interesting is that in the Express, it's also saying that while there's all this uncertainty about whether the ban stands or doesn't, there is a scrabble for some 60,000 people who did have visas which were revoked, who have good clearance to go to the US, who are trying to desperately get those visas reissued now quickly so they can get back in under the wire, you know, to see family or whatever it is.
I mean, putting it in a bit of perspective, I mean, for a lot of those people, it was only ever a 3-month ban anyway, and I think that by the time this becomes law, I mean, so this if it becomes law, of course it's right, is that this is going to go on, and I think that in some respects this is where checks and balances start to
because what's going to happen is the executive order, if it gets upheld at appeal court level, then someone's going to take it to the Supreme Court. Congress will be asked to either fund or defund it, and if the Republican Party are having an argument with Trump, they can start blocking it or slowing it down. And then, no doubt, even if it does get upheld eventually, someone is going to lodge a suit saying, well, I wasn't able to see my mother when she was on her deathbed, or I'm separated from my wife, my human rights have been infringed, and it's going to drag on this for a long period of time. He's going to complain about all the way. But what's interesting is either if something terrible were to happen to a judge because Donald Trump has tweeted something stupid, or these 60,000 people who are desperately trying to get into the country because they've a perfect right to be there and they've been vetted to be there, if one of them is arrested for something even as minor as shoplifting or running a red light, he's going to turn around and say, and his supporters are going to turn around and say, see, this is why we don't let these people into the country. Every tiny thing is going to be used as a way of trying to justify one side or the other, and it's going to be very messy.
OK. Let's take a break. We've got plenty of stories queuing up to be talked about after the break, including a sapphire tribute to the Queen. It's coming up. You join us as we take a look at tomorrow's papers with the author and businessman Michael Heyman and the Daily Mirror columnist known as Fleet Street Fox, Susie Boniface. We're going to talk Brexit. We've talked Trump. We're now on to Brexit. There he is on the front. There it is, rather, on the front of the Telegraph. Their line here is Theresa May standing firm against rebels, presumably rebels in her own party.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's about a dozen of them. And, it's quite interesting that these are people that, if you'd gone back just a few months ago, would be considered arch loyalists, actually. I mean, and they are the Ken Clarks and others who are trying to be a moderating force on the Article 50 bill. I mean, whether they go in for this wrecking mechanism or not remains to be seen, but the point I guess they're making is that decoupling from the European Union is easier said than done. I think on the other hand, they've got to tread a very careful line with a democratic decision that has been taken and an expectation that it will be delivered upon. So the Prime Minister is saying she's going to stand firm.
But some of the things that's being... because there's a vote on this next week, a lot of the pro-Brexit newspapers are going to be saying to people, you need to worry, they're going to try and stop Brexit. And one of the things they're going to be discussing, and probably in these amendments, is Euratom. It's an EU nuclear policy. And this is something that was not on the ballot paper when we voted to remain or to leave. It wasn't really ever mentioned in the Brexit debate before the referendum. And Euratom is an organisation which technically owns all our nuclear waste. It supplies us with nuclear fuel. It certifies how our nuclear energy comes to us. Without Euratom, we are losing about 20% of our energy overnight. It's an important thing, and it was not in the referendum. However, in the notes to the bill, when the government put it out, it's included. We're leaving Euratom. Now, this is the kind of thing that we want our politicians to be discussing for us and saying, should we or shouldn't we?
Is it fair enough to put those amendments in so that you're saying, OK, we will leave the EU, we accept that, but there are certain conditions
I think so long as
it
is, it's more than filibustering, because I think the reality is that you've got to think about where does the legitimacy lie here in terms of the decisions that are taken. I mean, a referendum by its nature is not a perfect vote.
But it was a very broad question,
It's a broad question, but out of a referendum comes things that we won't like. It won't all be upside, and there will be things that we will undoubtedly lose by leaving the European Union.
I don't think anybody wants to lose a fifth of our energy supply. So nobody suggested that we're going to lose our nuclear fuel.
But this is, I guess, the moderating influence that they can have about certain things which we may or may not be.
This is what our politicians are paid to do, and they should be doing, and discussing this and going into the detail of how Brexit affects
exactly. And I think this is where this sort of issue about what kind of Brexit is it? Is it hard Brexit? Is it a softer Brexit? I mean, I think that everything here is going to be about getting some deals on the table where people feel we've won something out of that in terms of the European Union. I think, in many respects, there's quite a lot of similarities in what they're saying, actually. I mean, I don't think the Prime Minister is saying she wants the worst deal possible.
Quite the reverse, yes, OK. Let's move on to the front of the Financial Times. They have this, the same lead story, actually, as the Express, suggesting that foreign patients will need to pay up front for NHS care. I think in the copy it says that bills are usually sent out after they've received treatment.
Yes. And the thing is, everyone who presents at hospital for an emergency case, such as the issue that was raised during the week of the Nigerian lady who had quadruplets, if you present as an emergency, it doesn't matter where you are from, you are treated in this country. You're treated in the United States, where you pay through the nose normally, but you're treated for free if you are an emergency. That is a basic, fundamental medical ethic. So it's not a case of, like the lady who was in the papers this week, would not get treated under these rules. This is for non-urgent care. This is for people who come here and don't have an urgent need at all, but are using the NHS for something. Now, some of the papers are saying that this is going to include GPs and receptionists now having a legal duty to flag up people they think don't have a right to NHS care because they're not resident. Now, GPs don't take on new patients that aren't, don't have a residency and don't have an address and aren't supposed to be there. So that's going to be quite difficult for them to do. And second, of course, anyone who goes to hospital, even for non-urgent care, has an NHS number. And if you don't have one, it's going to come up in the system, and hospitals already have a legal duty to, pursue your home nation for care.
But this is going to be quite popular with a lot of people who get
I think the key thing about it is it's an emotive issue, which is that people feel it's an issue of right and wrong about who should pay for what. Even by the government's own admission, it's relatively small sums of money compared to the overall NHS budget.
They hope to recover up to £500 million.
£500 million, which in terms of the overall NHS budget is small. It also comes against a backdrop where a lot of this is already done. I mean, they collect about 65% of fees owed. But I think it does come down to a more fundamental question about the future of the NHS and about what people feel they put in and what they get out as a result. And I think this is one of those issues where the government sees some potential popularity in what is a very difficult debate for them.
OK, I'm going to rush you on because we've only got a minute, and you've picked out this picture on page 5 of the Daily Mail because I think it's a special occasion, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
I love it.
Her Majesty's Sapphire Jubilee as of tomorrow. She makes history, 65 years on the throne. Well done, her. But I don't really see how seeing a millionaire draped in sapphires is supposed to make me feel warm and happy inside. I'd look jolly lovely if I'd had...
on the other hand, it's a beautiful David Bailey portrait, I think.
That's 3 years old.
But it's been brought out as one of the great iconic photos that he's taken. I think it marks the life of a remarkable human being.
OK, we've just squeezed in, I think, about 20 seconds to talk about carrots. I promised it an hour ago. Can't resist.
According to last week's salad shortage story, with entirely different reasons, lettuces are in short supply from Spain.
By carrots.
There is now a suggestion that carrots and parsnips could be affected because of a cold snap here in Britain. However, I don't know about carrots so much, but parsnips always do very well in a frost, so this story is rubbish.
Stock up on the carrots. I think that's what you've got to say.
You're
I mean,
You're
going to need more vitamin C.
Carrots now, Michael. But we're OK on parsnips. Well, that's a relief. Anyway, lovely to see you both. Susie and Michael, thanks very much indeed.
Thanks for having us.